Hello, today we are making, according to the Pinterest tutorial, the perfect paper bow. The tutorial says you can use some vintage papers. So I've pulled out some it's vintage map paper, some encyclopedias, music paper, pattern paper. I've also pulled out some ledger paper and then just thin paper to see what we can actually do with this tutorial and how far you can push it. I don't often make bows or use bows, so let's have a look. The tutorial calls for 3 parts to the bow, 2 rectangles, 1 tiny long strip, and the tails basically. And it merely says that you can scale it to the size of bow you want. So this is what the tutorial asks for: 2 strips the same size. I have made mine 3 centimeters by 11. A tail that you cut little swallow tails in. This is smaller, 2.5 by 20, and a tiny little piece that you'll wrap around your actual bow. This is just over 0.5 centimeter by 11 again. So first step, to take your 2 pieces and crumple them up. This vintage paper is very soft and it's not brittle. I would imagine that brittle paper will not handle this very well. I don't know why the scrunching is necessary, but we're following the tutorial. Lay them over each other and bring the insides together. The scrunching probably made it easier to bring the insides together. You're taking your thin piece, mine happened to have a nice pattern, and you are wrapping around your middle piece. Obviously my piece is now very long, it could be short to make the bow, and then you glue. I'm just going to use some Brit to get that going. So that's a rudimentary bow, and then your tail you fold over each other at an angle, and again you stick the bow on that. Okay, so that is following the tutorial. Here's some issues I have. I think the balance between the size of the bow and the tail is out. So this is the tail 0.5 centimeter narrower than the bow. I don't actually like that the bow isn't rounded, so I don't know why the tutorial suggests that you don't have a long strip that you just squish. So we can try that now. I'm going to glue these little edges so that they make a round bow. See, just that little touch I think makes it look much more finished. This is obviously to use up your vintage pieces. This will look nice on a, what do I have handy, a tag. Something like that, looks quite smart. And if it goes in a journal and it gets squished, it's fine, you still get the effect. The crumpling adds quite a lot of texture, and if you ink that before you crumpled it or spray misted it or something like that, I think that would also be good. So let's try it in a different paper. Oh no, let's try it on the same paper, except instead of 2 squares I'm going to do a long strip to see if that affects the bending and ruffling. So instead of now folding it and cutting it, I'm going to do it. So again, it's the crumpling. And then I'm going to fold it into a bow so that the top pieces meet in the middle, and then bring it together. It's slightly trickier. There is some tearing in the paper which wasn't there before, so that could be the reason why the tutorial doesn't suggest a continuous loop. And then again, wrapping the middle bit around and gluing it. The easiest way to do the tail is just to fold it over lightly. You cut a little slit in the middle, and from the sides you cut to meet the middle point. So that is, I've made my tail half the size of the bow this time. So the bow is 2 and the tail is only 1 centimeter wide. I just want to see if this does anything to the balance. So that's far more balanced. Obviously you can make your tails much shorter. You get a poofier bow because you kept it as 1. It can still go flat, but the tearing and things where you gather it in the middle is far more pronounced than when you did the 2 separate pieces. So I would actually suggest that the tutorial was right with the 2 separate pieces, and you glue the edges after the fact if it bothers you. I just want to see how small you can go on these bows. This is a bow body of 1 centimeter wide by 10 centimeters. Again, the same way. I'm doing it in 2 pieces this time to avoid the tearing. I mean, this paper is from 1908, I think, so it could very well be that there is just tearing as a matter of course. And let's glue. It's just to get the tail right now. So this is a tiny one. I just did the tail at an angle, so you end up with a bow of like 4 by 4.5. So that's quite a tiny bow. They're cute as an embellishment, but they really are quite shabby, and they're a little bit boring, but they actually do add quite a nice element. I'm just feeling like I want some color, so I think it's either stamping or dyeing the paper before you do it. So either way, it works. You need to play around with scale, and I prefer the finish where you tuck together the ends and you glue them together, but don't attempt a long strip, you'll get some tearing. So next up I've got some pattern paper. This is obviously also incredibly fragile. I'm just going to do some panels out of here and see how that takes the so these are the 2 sections. I'm not going to crumple them because they're so fragile. Again, they're easy to handle. I wonder if you take a contrasting little piece. This is cardstock, whether it's too heavy. Yeah, that's much too hard. It doesn't bend. It's just too much on such a fragile. So it's really just playing with your balances. I'm just going to go, and this one says simplicity, which is actually quite a nice little, yeah, so stick with your little tie as the same as your paper. Glue stick works fine to keep these guys together, they're not heavy. And then the tail again, I'm just cutting it by hand to see I would say ratio between bow and tail, there needs to be about half. Your tail is half the width of what your bow is. And then these I'm just that's cute. Because they weren't crumpled, but again, I would tuck the one end in and just glue it to create the illusion of a false loop. I'm trying some of my tea-dye paper from yesterday. I'm not even cutting it, I'm actually just ripping it to a size that looks okay, and then halving that for the 2 panels, thin one for the tail, and whatever I have lying around. This crumpling again, pinching in the middle. I've got a piece of the pattern paper for the little tie. The tie actually can be very, very short. It's just to keep the whole thing together. So you don't need to wrap it and wrap it. I'm going to try it with some string now to see if we can get some color and textures into these guys or girls. And then this is the string. So even like that with torn paper, it's still it's cute. I mean, it's a much more shabby look. And then you can go ahead and embellish these guys with beads or sequins or die cuts. Or let me see what I've got on my desk. It's quite a good basis, and it is incredibly quick and incredibly easy to make. Lastly, I'm going to try it on the, no, not lastly, I'm going to try it on 2 types of paper to see. It's ledger paper, but I mean it's what school copybook would be. It's not heavy paper. So again, very, very good for using scraps. This is 4.5 by 2.5. This is slightly thicker, so on the slightly thicker you need the scrunching up step, and then just pinch them in. This paper works fine. It's a slightly stiffer bow, and then just I'm going to try a little baker's twine on this one as the tie, and see if you tie it in a knot and you leave the dangles to form part of the tail, whether that still looks okay or whether it looks unfinished, whether you need the little paper thing in the middle. So there you go, and then the tail needs to be, shall we say, about there. So any thin, smooth, non-brittle paper will work. You can tear it, you can cut it, you can go quite small. These are very easy to make. My favorite so far is actually the one with the string. I like this size. This one I think was a little bit too small. It looks a bit straggly. The big ones are fine. If that's your look, the torn paper also good. Let me see, what is this? 4 by 4.5. That's actually a very good size. So that would mean your strip is 8 and your 2 little body parts are 4 centimeters each. And how wide? 2. That makes a very good sized bow. I'm going to try some ribbon. This is very narrow, 1/2 centimeter. but that's also lovely. Just going to give it a glue dot. If you do go to the trouble of gluing down the edges that they form a loop again, make sure that your front folds over your back, because otherwise you end up from the front with that showing, versus this one, it's at the back where you don't see it. So by the time it's on the page or on the card or whatever, you won't see it. This one seems like it's missing a little thing there just to finish it off. So I've glued the little flat back embellishment. That is actually very, very cute with a mixture of textures rather than for example that one. I think that one's balance was out. So the balance, that's my one takeaway here. It's super easy to make, but you have to get the balance right. So once you start and you have a solution like these two, stick with it and write it down that you know when you make them again. And then that's the one where we didn't do it in 2 bits, not as neat in my opinion. And then that's the very first one, which I've flattened with force. Again, the tails in relation to the bow, the balance isn't good. This is in a quick release dye paper, so it would be the same as like a wax paper or a pattern tracing paper. Again, it folds really nicely. This is in music paper. It's quite a matte music paper. You can do it. It was far more difficult, and there was quite a lot of damage or tearing on the side, but again, depending on the look that you're going for, absolutely possible. What I didn't mention is this tutorial was on the Nick of Times blog. I'll put that in the description, and she had given a step-by-step tutorial on how to use this for use in a garland, so if you string the whole lot around. So her bows were much bigger. Alright, I've made some of the bigger bows and I've just embellished them with a hot glue gun. So that's little bits of lace and a die cut. This is again, it's a jelly print plate. It was just a waste piece with a large embellishment and like a ribbon. So really you can actually go quite crazy with these things as a base. So it's probably a good idea to have a whole lot just as a base, and then you can embellish either the tails or the body as you go along. Let's see, like even just glued on a big paper clip, that's a really nice embellishment. Okay, so these are super easy with paper that everyone has. You could probably only also use old newspaper or magazine paper. As long as the paper is smooth, I'm finding that the paper must read as soft when you touch it. So if you don't feel the grain, you'll notice in vintage book pages sometimes some of the pages they're smooth when you touch them. Those are making the best bows. Another one, except this one I just rounded the corners. So where's one? Yeah, this is a shabby one, that won't work. So if you have that one, this one I glued, but actually it's not even a perfect round, but I actually think that looks quite good. And then this one I gave a little lace tail and a little flat bead. And this is now the last one I've made, but actually it's one of my favorites. I prefer the round edges. To be fair, I was quite underwhelmed by these little bows when I started off, but I've now used them on just what you would use in your junk journal, a little index card, tag, a mini tag, a little mini envelope, a big envelope. I've stamped over the bow a big tag. And actually they add a really nice look, and it's not a look you see so often. At least I'm not seeing it in the junk journals that I make or have looked at. So I do prefer the slightly embellished ones with different textures, but for something so simple to make, I actually think it gives a very underestimated impact. So I'm glad I tried this pin, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.